February 1967. Rudy Van Gelder's studio in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. Pharoah Sanders is about to make a mistake. At least that's what it looks like. He's standing in the middle of the room surrounded by instruments that don't belong in a jazz session. Bells from West Africa. Tambourines, a thumb piano. Percussion that sounds like it wandered in from a completely different century. He's already been called a screamer, a vandal of the saxophone, someone who doesn't understand the rules. And now he's about to record his second album as a band leader for Impulse Records, John Coltrane's label, the most important jazz imprint in America. But what Sanders is planning doesn't sound like jazz at all. The session is built around one word: Tawhid, Arabic for oneness, the Islamic concept of divine unity. Sanders isn't Muslim. He's not Egyptian. He's a kid from Little Rock, Arkansas, who's been in New York for less than 5 years. So why is he building an album around a theology he doesn't practice, using instruments he barely understands, creating music that might alienate everyone who hears it? The answer won't make sense for another 20 years. By 1967, American music is tearing itself apart. Jazz, the music that once defined sophistication, rebellion, and black excellence, is losing ground. Rock is swallowing the youth market, soul is dominating radio, and jazz is being pushed into smaller and smaller rooms, playing for older and older crowds. But something else is happening in the shadows. A small group of musicians is refusing to go quietly. They're not trying to win back the audience. They're trying to destroy the very idea of what jazz is supposed to be. John Coltrane is leading the charge. His late albums, Ascension, Meditations, Om, sound like prayer and chaos fused together. Long, ecstatic, sometimes unbearable. Critics call them self-indulgent. Coltrane calls them necessary. And Pharoah Sanders is his most dangerous disciple. Sanders joined Coltrane's band in 1965. He plays the tenor saxophone like he's trying to break it. Multiphonics, multiple notes screaming out at once. Overblown tones that sound like sheet metal being torn in half. When Sanders plays, people walk out. But Coltrane keeps him on stage, because Coltrane hears something the audience doesn't. The sound of a man searching for God through violence. Now Sanders wants to prove he's more than Coltrane's attack dog. He needs his own statement, his own spiritual manifesto. Tawhid is that statement. But there's a problem. What Sanders is chasing isn't beautiful, it isn't comforting, and it might not even be music. The musician Sanders brings into the studio should have been a red flag. Sonny Sharrock on guitar, a man who treats his instrument like a weapon, not a melody machine. Dave Burrell on piano, classically trained but willing to abandon structure the second the spirit moves. Nathaniel Bettis on percussion, pulling from African traditions most American jazz musicians have never studied. This isn't a band, it's a ritual circle. The first track is called Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. 23 minutes long. It opens with bells, just bells. Ringing, overlapping, disorienting. No bass line, no drums locking into a groove, no melody to hold on to. Then Sanders enters on saxophone. But he's not playing notes. He's playing textures, harsh, sustained tones that vibrate somewhere behind your sternum. 30 seconds in and the album has already started shedding listeners. 1 minute in and half the potential audience is gone. By the time Sanders starts actually improvising, only the committed remain. And even they're not sure what they're listening to. Is this devotion or is this madness? Here's the impossible task Sanders has set for himself. He's trying to merge spiritual traditions that have no business being in the same room together. African polyrhythms, Middle Eastern scales, Islamic concepts of unity, Christian ideas of transcendence, free jazz improvisation that rejects all structure. It's syncretism, the blending of different belief systems, and syncretism is dangerous. Because when you try to honor everything, you risk meaning nothing. The second track, Japan, pushes this tension to its breaking point. Despite the title, it's not about Tokyo. It's Sanders trying to capture the feeling of Zen meditation through sound. Dave Burrell plays the same piano motif over and over and over, hypnotic, almost trance-inducing, and Sanders weaves around it, sometimes screaming, sometimes whispering, sometimes disappearing entirely into silence. It's 23 minutes long. In 1967, radio singles are 3 minutes. Album tracks push to maybe 7 or 8 if you're ambitious. 23 minutes isn't experimental, it's commercial suicide. But Sanders doesn't care about radio. He's not chasing hits. He's chasing something else, something he can't name yet. And that's when the session reaches the point of no return. The title track is where everything breaks. Tawheed. 17 minutes of sound that feels less like music and more like exorcism. Sanders plays with a tone that's apocalyptic, overblown, multiphonic, raw. Sharrock's guitar shrieks. The percussion rattles like something being shaken loose from the earth. And then, halfway through, Sanders does something that crosses a line. He starts chanting, not scatting in the jazz tradition, not vocalizing like a horn player mimicking the human voice. Chanting, repetitive, rhythmic, words that don't mean anything in English, that might not mean anything at all. He sounds like a shaman, like someone channeling something beyond himself. This is the moment Pharoah Sanders stops being a jazz musician and becomes something the industry doesn't have a word for. Bob Thiele, the producer at Impulse, lets it happen. He's backed Coltrane's wildest experiments. He knows some records aren't meant to sell. They're meant to exist as proof that someone tried. But Coltrane has a safety net. He's already legendary. He's already proven himself. Sanders doesn't have that luxury. And when this album comes out, the industry is going to make him pay for it. Tawheed is released in the summer of 1967. The cover looks prestigious. Sanders' face, eyes closed, lost in meditation. The design is elegant. It looks like an important album. But the music inside doesn't match the promise. Critics are baffled. Some hear spiritual depth, a worthy continuation of Coltrane's quest. Others hear noise, self-indulgence, a talented player disappearing into abstraction. Downbeat barely acknowledges it. The album doesn't chart, doesn't get radio play, doesn't make waves. Sanders is 26 years old. He's just released what he believes is his spiritual statement to the world. And the world shrugs. Then, on July 17, 1967, John Coltrane dies. Liver cancer. He was 40 years old. The loss is seismic. Coltrane wasn't just a musician. He was the spiritual center of the entire movement. The artist who gave free jazz legitimacy, who made labels take risks, who proved that avant-garde music could be profound instead of pretentious. Without him, the movement feels orphaned. Sanders loses his mentor, his protector, his collaborator, the only musician who truly understood what he was trying to do. And Tawheed, the album that was supposed to prove Sanders could stand on his own, gets buried under the weight of grief. The next 2 years are brutal. Sanders keeps performing, but gigs become harder to find. Club owners want recognizable names, familiar sounds. Sanders is too extreme for mainstream venues, but not famous enough to fill rooms on his own. He's stuck in no man's land. Too avant-garde to be commercial, too unknown to be avant-garde royalty. Alice Coltrane, John's widow, continues the spiritual work. Archie Shepp, Albert Ayler, they're all searching for the same transcendence. But without Coltrane, the scene feels fragmented, directionless. Tawheed starts to feel like an artifact from a moment that's already gone. But something unexpected is happening. Not in the press, not in sales figures, not in any way that can be measured by the industry. Musicians are listening, young saxophonists, percussionists, experimentalists who are tired of being told what jazz is supposed to sound like. They're not hearing failure in Tawheed. They're hearing permission. Permission to abandon structure. Permission to pull from any tradition that resonates. Permission to make music that doesn't serve an audience. Music that serves the search itself. The album isn't dead. It's dormant. By 1969, something shifts. Sanders releases Karma and everything changes. The opening track, The Creator Has a Master Plan, is a 32-minute odyssey that somehow bridges the gap between spiritual intensity and accessibility. It doesn't compromise, but it invites people in instead of pushing them away. The album becomes a breakthrough. Critics who dismissed Sanders start to reconsider. Audiences who found Tawhid impenetrable give Sanders another chance. And when they go back to Tawhid, they hear it differently. What sounded like chaos in 1967 now sounds like groundwork. What felt self-indulgent now feels like Sanders refusing to take shortcuts. Music journalists start writing about the album with new respect. Not as a classic, it's still too abrasive for that, but as a crucial document. Proof that Sanders was building a language before he had the vocabulary to explain it. By the mid-1970s, younger saxophonists like David Murray and Arthur Blythe are citing Sanders as an influence, not because of karma, because of Tawhid. Because Tawhid showed them you could make jazz that treated spirituality as primary and entertainment as secondary. The album starts appearing in academic studies. Ethnomusicologists analyze its blending of traditions. Spiritual seekers use it for meditation. It's not selling, but it's spreading. Tawhid never becomes a commercial success. Through the 1980s and 90s, as jazz enters a neoclassical phase led by Wynton Marsalis, Sanders' work gets pushed back to the margins. The emphasis shifts to tradition, technique, swing, everything Tawhid rejected. But underground, the album keeps circulating. Experimental musicians outside jazz discover it. Noise artists, drone musicians, spiritual seekers building ambient soundscapes. The album becomes a bridge, connecting the spiritual jazz of the 1960s to the experimental underground of later decades. By the 2000s, a new generation emerges. Kamasi Washington, Shabaka Hutchings, Matana Roberts, musicians building sprawling, spiritually ambitious work that refuses to stay inside genre boundaries. And when you listen to their music, you can hear Tawhid in its DNA. Not in the notes, in the intent. The willingness to prioritize vision over accessibility. To make music that functions as ritual, not entertainment. To pull from global traditions without asking permission. Sanders planted seeds in 1967 that took decades to sprout. And now they're everywhere. Tawhid was never designed to succeed. It was designed to be necessary. In February 1967, when Pharoah Sanders walked into Rudy Van Gelder's studio with bells and thumb pianos and a concept he could barely articulate, he didn't know if anyone would follow him. He didn't know if the album would be understood, appreciated, remembered. He didn't even know if it was good, but he made it anyway. Because some music isn't about reaching people. It's about reaching for something, even if you can't name what that something is. Tawhid didn't change jazz overnight. It didn't launch Sanders to stardom. It didn't prove he could stand apart from Coltrane. But it proved something else. That an artist could make a completely uncompromising spiritual statement and the music wouldn't disappear. It would wait. Decades later, Tawhid remains a difficult listen. The rhythms are fractured. The melodies are sparse. The spirituality is dense and tangled, and sometimes impenetrable. But for those willing to sit with it, the album offers something rare. A glimpse of an artist refusing every shortcut, every compromise, every safe choice. That's the legacy. Not that the experiment succeeded, but that it was worth making. Even if it took 20 years for anyone to understand why.